Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to Sovereign Submission. Today I am doing a live podcast on YouTube, and I am going to explore the topic of sexual shadow. So, what is sexual shadow? I think this is a term that is used sometimes in men's work, and also I think in therapy and other places where what we're exploring is essentially the ways that we keep our sexuality in shadow, the ways that we don't speak up for like what we really want or desire, and instead let it come out sideways in ways that are inappropriate or can be harmful to our relationships, or it can just kind of hijack our lives. One of the obvious examples of this would be pornography. Um, if you're somebody who is watching pornography, chances are that you are essentially are probably going to be addicted, because the way pornography works, it stimulates the dopamine receptors in our brain, and dopamine is essentially our native or natural form of cocaine, if you will. And so if we're watching a lot of porn, what we're doing is we're constantly getting that stimulation. But then what ends up happening is, like as with any kind of situation, we need more and more of it, and it can take us into more and more extreme places. Um, if you're someone who is watching porn and you're watching this right now, one thing that I want you to know is that it is possible to break the addiction around porn. And some people might say, well, if I watch porn once in a while, that's not a big deal. Like that shouldn't be an issue. And my response to that would be, as somebody who has watched porn in the past and has actually come to a recognition that, like, yeah, it seems like a little porn isn't a problem, but then I start watching more porn and more porn and more porn, and soon it does become a problem because it ends up taking over more things. And it ends up becoming one of those things where essentially what I'm doing is I'm displacing my sexual expression through watching porn. I'm not actually being real or clear about what I genuinely want. Instead, what I'm doing is I am farming it out to porn as a way to get my needs met, but I'm not really even getting those needs met. I may end up watching some porn, I may end up masturbating, and it doesn't really give me the full, deep satisfaction of connection that I really want and long for. And this is one of the challenges that a lot of men experience, regardless of what their dynamic is. And here on Sovereign Submission, we're talking a lot about submissive dynamics, and there's definitely plenty of porn out there, whether you're into cuckolding or you're into a female-led relationship, or the idea of a woman dominating you, or even just watching a woman seduce a man can be a really powerful experience. But it's one of those cases where it can also end up taking over your life in a way where you're like, okay, I'm getting my need met this way, but I'm not actually in a relationship with someone, and I'm not actually getting the chance to fully experience the sexual connection with that person. What I find with porn is that porn is a form of sexual shadow because it basically resides in that area of our lives that we don't express to anyone else. Most people aren't going out there and saying, yeah, I watch porn. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to even talk about the types of porn that they watch or anything along those lines, because to admit that is to put ourselves into a place where we're like, oh, I'm exposed. You're going to see what I want and who I am. And people get weird about that. So I think one of the things that we really need to recognize is that, like with sexual shadow is really any sexual activity or behavior where we're not taking ownership of what it is that we really want. And we're allowing that to essentially control and dictate the way that we interact with other people. One of the best examples that I can give from my own life. Like I found that, like, I would say that I've operated from my sexual shadow a fair amount, not just with pornography, I have there, but also in terms of in previous relationships, cheating on my partners, where I wasn't really clear about what I wanted. And if I felt like I was blocked from getting what I wanted, but I wasn't being honest about it, what I would do is go out and go get it anyway, but I'd go and get it on the side. And even when I was in open relationships in the past, I wasn't always expressing myself cleanly and clearly in those relationships. So I've been in both polyamorous and monogamous relationships, and I've seen sexual shadow come out. So we can't even assume that, like, if you're in an open relationship, that you're automatically going to be devoid of sexual shadow. Here's the truth. Everyone has sexual shadow. Whether you're a man or a woman or identify as something else, like, you always have some form of sexual shadow in your life. And the way that sexual shadow comes out is through what is not expressed, but also through the behaviors that you do that aren't clear and clean, where you're operating in a way where you're not being really honest or real with other people about what you want or need. In my particular case, it came out in the form it's come out in the form of certainly consuming porn and letting that kind of be the sexual, kind of feeding the sexual fire. But it's also come out through cheating. It's even come out through having sexual fantasies where I'm with somebody, but I'm not with them. I've been with somebody else in my mind, or I've been fantasizing about someone else in my mind while having sex. This was particularly the case in my second marriage, where I was in a situation where I was having a lot of vanilla sex and didn't really care for it, didn't really enjoy it. Instead of being honest about that and speaking up for, like, what I really wanted, or the fact that I wasn't really happy with the relationship dynamic, I ended up fantasizing a lot. I also ended up looking at porn, and I ended up also cheating, on my ex-wife. I'm not proud of that. It is something that really harmed that relationship, and it's not even something where the full extent of it was ever really spoken to. And here's what I recognize: like, I operated from sexual shadow. I let my sexual shadows control the conversation. And those sexual shadows would basically say, well, hey, you're not getting your needs met, but you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want this relationship to end. You're getting everything taken care of, or it's a comfortable life, or whatever else. Well, you can go out on the side and go do what you need to do, and then no one's the wiser. Problem is that someone was the wiser, and it wasn't even my ex-wife, it was me. Because what I was doing is I was carrying the shame and guilt of my sexual shadow. And, at a certain point, it started to become too much to carry, because I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew that what I was doing was unfair to that relationship. I knew that what I was doing was causing harm. And it's something where, that's where it can come out sideways. Like, when we're not real with what we truly want, if we're not honest about what we desire, it will come out sideways, and it will come out in a way where it will ultimately harm the relationship. It will ultimately harm us. It might even be one of those cases where, like, say you're in a relationship for years and years and years, and you don't even get out of that relationship. It could come out in the form of, like, dementia or something else, because there's some part of you that has lied to the other person that you're with, and has lied to yourself as well, in order to justify what you're doing. And the cognitive dissonance adds up. So these are the consequences of sexual shadow. So the question then comes in, like, how do we take ownership of sexual shadow? How do we stop operating from a place of shadow and allowing that to control us? How do we choose to really be real with ourselves about what we want and need and desire? And the answer to that is that we have to necessarily take a good hard look at ourselves and the choices that we're making, so that we can ensure that we're not operating from that place of shadow all the time. That means that we have to take a good hard look at how we choose to show up in our lives and say, is this what I really want? Do I want to be operating from a place of shadow? Do I want to be operating from a place where, yeah, I might be going and like paying for sex, for example, or I might be cheating, with somebody else, or I may be looking at porn, or I may be fantasizing but not telling anyone what my fantasies are. When we do that, we are actually taking away from our own sexual erotic power. We are taking away from our own connection with our inner eros and from the eros of the relationship itself. So, how do we own it? Well, it means having the hard conversations. And hey, look, as somebody who has admitted a fair amount of things on here, I know how hard it is to have those conversations. And what I can share with you is that what I've learned to do in recent relationships is start having those conversations. And by having those conversations, it has made things much easier in those relationships. Yeah, in the moment I've felt uncomfortable, and it's felt really uncomfortable, and it's felt scary, and it's felt like, oh my gosh, like what am I doing? I am sharing this thing. But you know what it's also led to? It's led to deeper intimacy, it's led to deeper contact, it's led to deeper understanding because I've been honest with myself and with her. I've been honest about what I want. I've been honest about what I need. I've been real instead of continuing to operate from a place of shadow. So it's really important to understand this and recognize that how we operate matters. And that when we operate from a place of shadow, it will come back and harm us. It will hurt our relationships. But if we take a look at that shadow, we can start getting real and clear about what matters to us. And how do we look at our shadows? Well, ironically enough, I would say take a look at your fantasies, take a look at the pornography that you're consuming, and ask yourself, like, what does this represent to me? On one level, it's a desire, but on another level, it can also represent a level of sexual wounding. A lot of times, what we are drawn to is really something that reflects to us like some part of ourselves that we want healing around. In my case, I found for a long time like this desire to be seduced by older women, to be fascinating. What I didn't recognize and didn't connect the dots around was that this was in part speaking to unresolved issues around my relationship with my stepmom, and wanting to have that particular wounding healed. Well, there was no way that was ever going to happen, but it spoke to what was going on, and it spoke loud and clear to the fact that there was this unresolved wounding. So I had to find a way to work through that. And once I worked through it, it changed the way that I related to my sexuality, and it changed the experience. I was able to step knowingly into conscious submission. I was willing to choose what I desired instead of continuing to operate from a place of unconscious power dynamic in my life. Instead of choosing to operate from a place of shadow but not being real. So this is one of the things that we really want to explore. Now, if you need help with this, I do have a resource, and you can find it in the show notes. It's a book called it's the Hard Conversations Playbook. This is about learning to have the conversations with people. But I'm going to be having other resources available for you. And what I'd love to hear from you too is like, one, how did this land with you? What did you think? How true is this for you? But secondly, I'd love to know, like, what else would you like me to comment on or to discuss? This is a video channel for submissive men who want to explore their desires. There are plenty of female doms out there who share some thoughts and perspectives on submission, but one of the reasons I'm sharing this is to share like what it's like from the submissive side of things and to explore some of these topics that aren't necessarily spoken to and need to be spoken to if we're going to fully step into our own ownership and sovereignty. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.